it goes live. Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 228. As always, I'm going to start us off with a tune to give people time to get into the stream and what have you.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wild. Your new God's sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love and heed and folly, bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of servant sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall wail gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly profit laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Come down to search your manhood through all of thankless years. No age with give or wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all of thankless years.
And that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. Do go and check out his YouTube channel if you like good music. Okay, I don't know who we've got coming on this evening. I think AI is just about to join us, and I do believe Reality is going to join us later on as well. But other than that, I'm not sure. Good evening, AI. How are you going, mate?
I'm doing all right. Unfortunately, I've had the yearly, and this is a yearly thing. I think I said this last couple of years, and Duke on your streams. I'm having to deal with the large number of bohemian bourgeois wankers a few minutes down the road from me.
Oh yeah, we were actually talking about Glastonbury before we went live. Mitch and I were talking about one.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, obviously that's hit the news because you've got Kneecap, the so-called Irish nationalist group, which is funded by the UK government to quite a substantial amount, I should have to say. And also this Bob Villain character who I've never heard of, but he also has, you know, I think he has something to do with the Diversity Network, which is also funded by the UK state as well. So both actors and if I'm absolutely honest, I think all this is just manufactured outrage, and this is going to be used as a catalyst by the UK government to pass more legislation, which will, on the surface, appear to target, dysgenic foreigners, ethnic foreigners, and communists in this country, but instead it'll be used against people like us, like me and Mitch and others, and yourself, Iron Duke.
Yes, I think you're 100% correct about that. Did you also see that the Royal Mint have just unveiled a coin with Britannia as a black woman?
Oh no, I didn't see it. It didn't surprise me.
Yep.
Is she like a really fat black woman with big
No,
lips?
it's only a head. It's only a head.
Oh, okay. It's not like
So
a fat one.
you can't really tell, but it is definitely a black woman. And yeah, I just think they should fuck right off, to be honest with you. But there we go. That's just me.
Yeah.
Well,
Mitch,
did you have a first subject for this evening?
I'll see if I can. You see what?
Yep. Hang on. Let me put it on. There you go. Don't play too much of it, Mitch, because they'll hit us with a copyright. Yeah, lovely. Absolutely lovely.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't paid attention to Glastonbury in over 10 years.
Yeah, longer. I can say that's longer for me.
Yeah. Someone on Twitter said Nigel Farage is going to use that as campaigning material in the next general election. So it's kind of.
Oh yeah, I mean, all right-wing grifters tonight are absolutely creaming themselves, and not because this disgusting. I can't say the. I really want to say the word, but I can't say the word. Disgusting individual. Has basically attacked Britain and the English people. They don't really give a damn about that. That's because he just chanted, I won't say the word, but he wants to bring harm to the Israeli Defense Force, right? That's what he was chanting. I don't give a damn about foreign military units or regiments, particularly ones in other continents, but yeah, I mean, that's what people care about. They've served a purpose. As I said, Kneecap as a band are part of, they're funded by the UK government. Which I believe when they were confronted on this, someone who was confronted, they sort of like had a little hissy fit, and it's been sort of like buried a bit. But yeah, I mean, as I say, this was organised by the BBC and co. Like how they organise. I mean, this is a classic example, and this is what I've learned from this. You remember how museums, art galleries, and museums, when you had Extinction Rebellion, suddenly they would turn up with a can of soup, and they would have, what was it? The press were there, waiting. You had all these journalists there for the shot and everything. And it's like, we know the gallery, and it was revealed, thanks to Alexander Adams, who I've had on my channel a few times. The galleries would contact the press. They would all coordinate with, the NGOs involved with Extinction Rebellion to come down and pull this stunt. So this is all coordinated, and I view this as all being coordinated. And it's giving the people on the right the rage bait that they crave, and will do nothing with it. I mean, I've seen Priti Patel, on television, getting all very serious and stern about this, that we're going to do something. And they didn't do anything for the last 15 fucking years about these sorts of people. They wouldn't do anything now. You've got Labour, who are trying to pivot their sort of soft, patriotic, peppered thing, and then you got Palestine Action, which again, it's just all NGO funding psyop at the end of the day. I mean, I'm not the biggest conspiracy theorist, but it's like with Trump and Israel and Iran, what we saw this week. We know all three of them. They're all talking to each other. It's probably, I called it a phony war, Iron Duke, because everything. I mean, literally everything is just fake and gay and black and brown and also Fenian apparently as well in the fields of Somerset.
Yeah, it's all gaslit, mate, for sure. I mean, we don't know what the results of those US strikes on those supposed power plants were. No one does. It's all gaslit bullshit.
Yeah, it is, and as I say, anything that will come of this legislation, like the terror laws that were meant to be used against radical Islamists in the wake of the 7/7 bombings and other terrorist events committed by Muslims, will be used against it'd be used against people like us. It'd be used against people wanting to host events. I mean, I know this sounds daft. If they bring in a legislation against, gatherings like this, hateful rhetoric at gatherings, you can see organizations like this Shieldings event,
Yes.
or the Basket Weavers, if they hold events, being shut down under legislation that was normally meant for like Glastonbury, example. I can see that happening. I actually think that is more likely than not now.
Yeah, totally
Given
agree.
that the Basket Weavers are on the radar of the scumbags that hope not hate, and the Shieldings event is also on their radar because that's how they doxed.
Hope Not Hate is another NGO which is British government funded.
Yeah, it's all funded. It's all gay psyops, and for me, I haven't really watched. I mean, I saw bits of it. I'm not sort of engaging with. I mean, this is a personal, because I live quite close to it, and I know on the local side this is going to be a story that people are going to talk about, because I've met Evis, I've met the daughter. I don't really think much of them. They're a bunch of lefty shitheads, through and through. So I don't really care what. My opinion of them hasn't not changed any of this, but this is going to be a local point to be talked about for a while. It's going to be mentioned at my place of work come next week. And for me, I'm sort of mentally just preparing to check out from it, because I know that this is just going to be, redirected in some other place.
Yep, don't disagree with you. I think you're very wise. As you say, the right likes its bit of rage bait, and Glastonbury is always going to provide that. But I mean, I'll be honest, on my X, on my Twitter, I haven't posted anything about Glastonbury at all.
I tell you what, Iron Duke, when we win, we're going, when we have our Glastonbury, when we win, when we have Glastonbury, Morrissey is going to be the headline act, and we're going to have like him surrounded by, like a vanguard of paras, and
That would
Kneecap
be
are going
funny.
to, and then Kneecap are going to be, brought out onto the stage, and they're going to, well, sorry, I won't say it, but
You gotta be careful, mate. We're on YouTube.
jokes, everybody.
I see that Ataman is not going to be joining us. His office is being replastered and he's going to bed. That's fine. Hopefully we'll see Ataman next week, or maybe even on Wednesday. Who knows? Although I think he's usually working when we do our history stream on Wednesday. Just to remind people in the chat, guys, if you want to support the channel, you can do so via Entropy. You can also ask Super Chat questions there, and the link is pinned at the top of the chat. And any donations I get all go on basically paying for limitless streaming on StreamYards, and also for streaming on X, on Twitter. So it all goes back into the channel. All right. So, Mitch, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about other than Glastonbury?
It's not a massive subject, but there's a guy by the name of Jay Fraser who is serving in the Russian army. So he's a Scotsman of the same age as me, and I only knew of this guy because of Callum. He used to be on Lotus Eaters. Like his Twitter, like those two guys are like acquaintances of one another via their Twitter. And there's oh no. Yeah, got translated. Yeah, there's like an article where the guy just details why he's in the Russian army.
Well, I think that's perfectly reasonable. I certainly think that's more reasonable than fighting for Ukraine, to be honest with you. But there you go.
Yeah. So, for example, the interview starts with, like, is there a life section, men?
I mean, we were saying before we went live that the Russians have made it very clear that if they capture foreign mercenaries in Ukraine, those guys are getting 10 years hard labor. And personally, I wouldn't want 10 years hard labor in a Russian jail, gotta say.
No.
I thought Lindy Page was mainly interviewing British mercenaries who were fighting for the Ukrainians, not for the Russians. Davy 1602. I mean, I don't follow Lindy Page. I occasionally look at one of his videos, but all I saw him interviewing was mercenaries who were fighting for Ukraine. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I will say, Andrew, my favourite memory of a couple years back, probably during the start of the the conflict that started a couple of years ago. I mean, I know it's going to go on since 2014, but normally the start of the open conflict was when you had the Reddit battalion from America, mainly from the United States, that arrived in, I think it was like Lviv or somewhere like that. And they were posting, they were sort of gloating and posting from the barracks, and somebody on their Reddit forum went over, was it like to 4chan, Mitch, or something like that, and contacted the Russian. They contacted Russians to send
Oh yeah,
information to
the
the Russians.
Russians bombed it, didn't they? They
And the
bombed it,
Russian,
missiles it
yeah,
or something.
Yeah, it
and
was. Like there was another incident where that international Reddit battalion, some Brazilians were posting about themselves all over Instagram, including the literal barracks itself. The Russians clocked in on it, and yeah, missile strike, like hundreds dead or wounded.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think,
someone needed to teach them a bit of OPSEC, I think.
yeah,
Last I heard of the Reddit battalion is after that incident, because with the one in Lviv, I remember that they didn't. Most of them weren't actually killed. It was the other barracks around them that were hit. They were sort of like somehow lucky enough to survive, and then afterwards, as a sort of probably like a punishment, their weapons were taken from them, and then they were told they had to march on foot from Lviv to Kiev in the capital, so across Ukraine, and that they were getting concerned because of the Russian um, you know, air force targeting them, that it was open ground, that they would be, that there was reports that people were being the roads were constantly under attack and everything. And that was the last time I ever heard about that. I don't know. I imagine some ran away, you know.
Michael K, 19th century fan in the chat, is saying, is treating mercenaries or foreign volunteers as not POWs against the rules of war? It's a bit of a grey area, Michael K, 19th century fan. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I was in the SADF, I had a South African passport, so I was not a mercenary.
yeah,
But I've still got a South African passport, amongst others. But anyway,
yeah. I think this is like the main crux of it. Is like, is this a valid point of view to have, where like this guy is fighting for the Russians on the basis of our elites are bloody evil? And he says, I would agree with the last sentence here, which is Russia's moving in the right direction. Like, yeah, Russia's not perfect, but compared to this country, I would say the Russians are in a spiritually better position than we are currently.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all, Mitch. I think you're right. And as I said, I don't understand the British mercenaries who've gone across to fight for Ukraine. I think they're crazy. I mean, they're literally fighting for the gay.
Yeah, I just saw it as because I remember a couple of years back, like a lot of I mean, to be fair, this is mainly off like Russian channels and Telegram, but the overall point of view, at least with guys on the ground, was if they come across any Western mercenaries or Western volunteers, they just kill them on the spot, because to their mind, it's one thing taking a Ukrainian guy prisoner, because at the end of it, they see it as a civil war. Like, Russians see Ukrainians as their kin, so they don't have any sadism or anything. Like, they don't have any evil instinct in that sense.
I know earlier in the war, Mitch, they did capture a couple of British mercenaries, and actually they released them.
Azov. Yeah, they were with Azov, and they got let go after some deal or something. But those guys came back.
I know they've also captured at least 2 British mercenaries over the last month or two. And that was after the Russians announced that foreign mercenaries in Ukraine who were captured are going to get 10 years in prison. And I don't think I'd fancy 10 years in a Russian jail, frankly. But,
I always just thought that mercenaries, and maybe it's the quality of mercenaries today's age, but mercenaries would never allow themselves to be taken prisoner.
Well, you can't always stop. You can't always stop
Well,
it.
yeah,
unless you're prepared to blow yourself up with a grenade. You can't always stop it.
I guess it depends the enemy. I guess it depends the enemy. Like, there's some, as you said, that if they're quite brutal, it's like...
there were some British mercenaries who were captured. I think it was in Angola in the 70s, and they were executed. But the Angolan commies who captured them executed them. But they weren't very good. least from what I can recall. But
Yeah,
anyway.
so one thing might interest you, Ayo, is so the Cumans, back in the turn of the millennium, like the previous millennium, the Cumans were known for being mercenaries. And when the Mongolians came along, they did not show any mercy to the Cumans because obviously some of the Cumans accrued a massive reputation as basically being sellswords. And this is why when you have the Cumans eventually savaged upon by the Mongolians, and also it's not worth noting that the Mongolian Empire recruited a lot of Turkic tribes who had scores to settle with the Cumans. This is why all the Cumans either moved into Russia or they moved into Hungary and later had to assimilate because they were not safe with the Mongolian Empire around.
Yeah, there
were
were people in the chat are saying there were Republican mercenaries in the Spanish Civil War. There were, but there were also right-wing mercenaries who fought for Franco's lot.
Yeah, Catholic. I guess you could say like sort of Catholic monarchists. Well, I don't say Catholic nationalists, but you know what I mean. Like more like right-wing Catholic types were sympathetic with. I mean, the Labour Party at large in the UK were quite sympathetic with Franco and his lot.
Yeah, I do. I think there were more Brits who were fighting on the Republican side for the commies, but they were mostly socialists and commies and what have you. So,
I mean, I think they were kind of like the minority idealistic, types that were well, that were sort of into that. I was going to say, what was it George Orwell? But some would later to that's one example, would sort of regret it, or I mean, I don't know if he ever openly admitted that he regretted it, but he sort of realised it wasn't as clear cut as he was, led to believe.
Someone in the chat is talking about Mad Mike Hoare, who's a South African dude, and I used to drink in the bar. Those guys used to drink in Durban. I think it was the Elangeni Hotel, if I remember correctly. I think so, but it was certainly the bar they used to use. But anyway,
no. I'll just go back to the Cuman points. I mean, Cumans were at large, as Mitch said, they were just a warrior class, nomadic class of people who were dominantly horsemen and were used as cavalry mercenary. They were very good. I mean, they were very good. There was a Cuman dynasty that set up in Egypt, for example, because some of them went to the Arab Muslim world and became quite significant leaders there. But a good percent into Turkey, but a lot of them that were went westwards into Hungary or north into Russia.
the humans are the guys who are in that game, aren't they? AI,
Kingdom Come,
Deliverance.
the first one. I mean, they're in the second one as well, but they're in both and they make up, which is it is true that they do make up the bulk of the king of the Sigismund, who's like the sort of villain in the game series. They make up the probably about half or good percentage or near a third or something of his army, which is true because he Sigismund in real life he faced quite a few rebellions in Hungary from the Hungarian nobles, so he relied on the Cumans as a as a force to put down rebellions. And as it's sort of explained in the game, the reason why they're so brutal is because they have to be brutal to assert his royal authority over, and then he applies that into sort of Bohemia. But yeah, they feature in it, and they are quite an interesting group of people. to look into. I have become slightly fascinated with them as a like one of the in many ways they're like the last great nomadics coming from the east.
Sorry, AI. I know Mish is away from his keyboard for a minute. Did you have a first subject for this evening you wanted to talk about, AI?
Well, I don't really want to talk about Glastonbury because we've already sort of covered that ground.
Mhm.
Uh, let's see. Actually, there was something I was going to talk about. I'll just bring up my Twitter a second. Because
Is this
I
that?
saw.
Is this that New York, Ugandan, Asian, whatever he is, fellow?
No, I wasn't going to talk about that. Maybe we could talk about that a bit later. That I wasn't particularly. This what isn't really um. I was just going to say I wasn't going to talk about that. I was going to talk about. Hold on a sec. There's this girl who I guess is in the sort of heathen pagan space. Her name is Alvi Ganilla.
Oh,
I
I've
don't.
heard of her. Yeah.
Yeah, she has sort of, and she. I don't want to say she's copied, but it. I've noticed that she's taken great inspirations from Survive the Jive. So I'll just leave it at that. But in some of like her videos and stuff like that. But she's been posting from Sweden. She's married to a Swedish man, and um, she sort of posts like Norse and Germanic pagan sort of history, culture, that sort of stuff. Lately it's been the whole midsummer. And she put a tweet out which um it is quite interesting because this one is sort of I've been seeing this more and more, and this is like a copy and paste from not Survivor Jive, but other like the Hellenists and others. And it was just this. It says Christianity is part. She puts in quoting. This is quotations. Christianity is part of European culture. And then she puts, you'll be saying Islam is part of European culture 1,000 years from now. If it were to take over, why not? They also believe in Jesus, or they believe that Jesus was a prophet or something. Um, right. That was her thing. And it did get me thinking of, something that, Survivor Jive and other pagans in his circle have um said in the past. One of the problems that you have sort of broaching this subject is when you attack. The problem is it is part of European identity, and sorry, Bowden talked about it because he was a pagan. He was a neo-pagan himself, and he said that fundamentally Christianity operates as the superstructure that makes up a good majority of European thought and civilization, even if so to undo that would be in itself attacking European identity as it is. And bear in mind it's already been attacked from all fronts, as we constantly see on a weekly and basis. And I and also just to the is obviously she's got her point she wants to go across. She wants to get people into the whole neo pagan stuff. To do that, she has to, attack Christianity. I don't know why she has to do that, but th- this is also unfortunately, this is also the canon of many American evangelicals, right? Who see that Judo-Christian harmony and connection. And so, in reality, and let's just get back to reality here. Christianity isn't. Christianity as a movement and the belief system, it was founded by Europeans. Okay, and while the origins of it, you could say, from the apostles and everything, but by the first century, it had split from Judaism. It rejected the Old Testament in favor of the New Testament. It was a separate faith system. It's a separate religion. Its churches were by European people in European cities at the time, in Anatolia, in the Greco-Roman world. And a lot of the attacks that come from that sort of origin basis, or it was just some rabbi cult that yada yada yada, therefore ignore it. But at the same time, they're ignoring that the problem isn't so much they're sort of just all on the vibes. They're all on the vibes of it. The problem is, this goes back to the temporal institutions and actually the spark of the civilization. You can't sit there and say that, like, Alfred was just some loser. King Alfred was some loser who was enthralled by a rabbi cult from the Middle East, because that doesn't make sense in on itself.
But King Alfred the Great also claimed descent from Woden, to be fair.
Well, exactly, but my point is, I do like her content, but at the same time, I see this from a lot of the neo-pagan crowd, and it is, it is ridiculous that you attack the superstructures that animated people like Alfred, figures in the chivalric knightly order, even Evola, who was very critical of Christianity, would not attack it from a European perspective, because he understood that the rite and the ritual aspect of Catholicism was deeply embedded in the racial component of the Greco-Roman world, which he was a big proponent of, because that was his people. What was it he said? He said that he referred to himself as a Catholic pagan, because he understood that as I said, the ritual aspect was connected to the ancient world. Even if he didn't believe and didn't fully sign up to the temporal institution.
Yeah, look, I see what you're saying, AI, but on the other hand, I'm a big fan of Survive the Jive. I think he does excellent stuff.
Yeah, I'm a big. I like Survive the Jive as well.
I don't hear him very often deliberately criticizing Christianity. I mean,
Well,
he
he
plugs
doesn't.
he
No.
plugs paganism because he's a pagan, but
Yeah,
I don't hear him doing much negative about Christianity, to be honest.
he's never criticized Christianity from that, because if you do that, you're just like you're sort of attacking that you are attacking European identity if you do in that regard. And just to sort of she could say, listen, Christianity had a big role in the as a superstructure of European identity. I don't think it has its basis now, though. I want to go back to more traditional natural roots. But to then just compare it to Islam, which, let's be honest, is an Arab centrist religion. It's an ethno religion for Arabs, which
Well, yeah,
there
but
was.
I mean, AI, I think you'd agree with me. It's like whenever you hear this crap about Judeo-Christianism and all this stuff, I don't like that either, to be honest. You know, I don't like it when people say Judeo-Christian civilization. It's because they're not the same thing, you know.
Well, exactly, no, because I mean, we saw. Here's a classic example, and this is the crux of like every, debate now with some loony right winger, particularly sort of the evangelical types. They will treat, say, the Old Testament, New Testament as the same thing. One's a sequel to the other. But a real Christian, and this has been normal in Christianity, it's not like a new thing, it's been normal in Christianity since probably the end of the Second World War, for obvious reasons, right? That the New Testament surpasses the Old Testament, okay? Jews follow the Old Testament, laws of Moses, whatever. Christians view, the Christian people who follow Christ are God's chosen people, right? Evangelicals, the justification for supporting Israel today is, that you bless the what was it? You bless Israel, the people of Israel, and so if they support the nation, the Israeli state today, it's like fulfilling God's promise or something like that.
Don't some of these evangelicals also believe that somehow or other Armageddon's going to start in the Middle East, and that's partly why they do it?
Yeah, you have to get all God's chosen people in the Holy Land for it to for Jesus to return. I mean, it's complete nonsense because number one, it's not even from their own scriptures, it is completely inaccurate anyway, as being proven by Tucker Carlson recently with Ted Cruz. You know, it doesn't even say. I mean, Tucker Carlson says, "What are you saying? We need to bless the state of Israel." It doesn't even say the nation of Israel. It just means like God's chosen. That's the thing. And from the Old Testament point of view, well, yeah, that would be the Jews, but we aren't Jewish. We're or say we in the sort of Christian terminology would turn around and say, well, no, we're Christian, we are the chosen, because that is the formation of the New Testament. And there is an absolute to it, because you can't be a Judeo-Christian because either you believe in Christ's divinity or you don't. If you believe in the God of Abraham but you don't believe in Christ's divinity in that regard, that there's the only way through him, the only way through salvation is through him, then you're Jewish. If you believe that he is, then you're Christian. There is that, and that's something where the evangelicals have had help and a monopoly in. I mean, from a Christian perspective, it's just outright. It's obscene levels of heresy that's sort of being exposed here, because not even quoting the New Testament accurately, or even the Old Testament accurately. It's just made up on the hop.
Yeah, look, I could well believe it. Religion is not something that I opine about all that much. I mean, I like pagans like Survive the Jive. I also like Christians like Apostolic Majesty or Dave the Distribuist. So long as they're on our side, I'm quite happy to be fairly Catholic, if you will pardon the pun, in my in what I take in from people on the right. So long as they're really on the right, I don't see that there's much purpose in pagans attacking Christianity as such. I think they'd probably be better off just banging their own drum, which is, as people have said in the chat, pretty much what Survive the Drive does. And as I say, I have no time at all for this Judeo-Christian nonsense, which is a nonsense, and it's merely made up to to make certain people happy, shall we say?
Yeah, true. And this may have been a bit of a ramble. I'm not, and to be honest, I don't really like talking about this sort of topic in the sense, but just purely from the historical, social and reading that I have of this, and the how it's connected to European identity and all that, and seeing how it's being used today is something I just wanted to get off my chest here, because um, it is quite annoying to see if you have no interest in it. Um, there are things that I have no interest in and I don't really want to talk about. But if there is a complexity to it that I'm aware of, and I choose to have like a flippant statement, say, "Oh, it's just this sort of nonsense," or just something like this. I like to think I wouldn't do that. I would just say, oh, I don't really I don't really want to engage with it because it's you know
Yeah. No. It seems a legitimate subject. AI is just not one that I feel able to comment deeply on because it's not something I
No.
pay a great deal of attention to. Mitch, have you got anything to say about this? I know that you're certainly interested in the pagan era of Anglo-Saxon England, for example.
I don't know much about religion. I mean, I've got a Bible, but then I've also got like pagan like sagas from the Norse as well. So it's kind of like I'm kind of like feet in both camps, but ultimately I'm more of a Christian side of identity because I don't think paganism is going to come back.
No, I mean, I think that's most unlikely, certainly for most people. I mean, whatever you may be in modern Britain or Australia or America or where have you, you're a cultural Christian, at least you have to be, because that's been the overwhelming culture for way over 1,000 years. I mean, almost 2,000, 1,500 years anyway.
Yeah, and I as I say, the girl who I referenced here, and her videos are good. She has researched. There are some. I mean, there's one bit she talks about the origin of the word of England, which isn't quite correct, and I think Survivor Jive did pull her up on that. But apart from that, she done some pretty good videos. I just the she knows, okay, she knows how Christianity formed and spread in Europe and how Islam spreads. Okay, she's not an idiot. Um, and I just thought for her was you know, you can compare the two, you can, criticize them both as, and I understand the pagan criticism of it just being, well, it was kind of foreign, we want to go back to more naturalistic roots. I get that. But just to sort of claim that both are equally, uh, both have the same sort of moral outcomes for Europeans if they're imposed is a ridiculous. I find quite uh, a cowardly, ridiculous statement to make, and I do take great objections to that, for obvious reasons. I mean, it's kind of obvious reasons why, but
Yeah. No, fair enough. I will say, guys, because this seems an opportune segue. On Saturday next week, so the day before we normally do this stream, we're going to have a special stream, and it's to mark the 1098th anniversary of the founding of England. Hang on.
I thought that was just like part of the usual Saturday stream because the 12th.
No, we're going to do it on Friday, Saturday. It'll be Saturday for me, but it will be Friday for you guys, I believe. And
interesting.
We're going to do a special stream to mark the anniversary from 927, when Athelstan was accepted as the King of England by the other kings on the mainland. So we will be doing a special stream for that on the 12th of July.
Yeah, don't start with. I'm glad that we're not starting. Everyone views it like the start of like the Kingdom of England with like bloody William at 1066. That really grinds. That really pisses me off. That.
Yes, absolutely not true at all. No, England dates to Athelstan in 927, a long time before William the Bastard invaded.
Yeah.
So we will have a special stream for that next week, guys. That was Aaron Hook's idea, so hopefully Aaron will be a guest on that stream. But yeah, we'll be doing that. And of course, on Wednesday, we've got our normal history stream coming up. And this week, we're going to be doing the Crimean War, 1854 to 1856. And it'll either be a fairly long stream, like our Waterloo stream was 3 hours. It might be a 3-hour stream, or we might even do it in 2 parts. We'll see.
Yeah, because the thing is, you got me on reading Leo Tolstoy, because he served as an artillery guy in that war.
Did.
Yeah.
And he served at the 4th Bastion, which got bombarded for like 10 days by the French, I believe. So I'll read his perspective over this weekend. I imagine someone like Aaron Hook or Jack will be the guy talking about the British diplomacy and geopolitics.
I certainly hope we can get Jack to come on for the Crimean War stream, because he's good on military history. And he's most welcome to join any of my streams, basically. But as I say, it'll either be a long stream or it will be in 2 parts. I'm not quite sure yet. We'll see how it goes.
I imagine long stream.
Have any of you read Tolstoy's War and Peace?
Yes.
I've got it on my bookshelf, but I haven't taken the time to read it yet. I will say
I've actually read all of it, and it's a damn long book.
Yeah, it's a long book.
Yeah, in the original Russian, one sentence, Tolstoy would take an entire page. That's the thing about, because the original rationale was he wanted to make a book about the Decembrists when they were exiled to Siberia, but in order to do that, he had to detail, okay, why were they in Siberia to begin with? Then he had to detail, okay, why did this Decembrist revolt occur to begin with? So in the end, he just ended up creating a book all about the Napoleon era Russia.
And people do say, Mitch, that one of the reasons, obviously there's quite a bit about Borodino in War and Peace. And people say his battle scenes are good because he was actually, as you say, in the Russian artillery in the Crimean War, so he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've read half of the books of us, and I will say he's a good novelist. But as you said, it's like the same with Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. It's one of those reads where it takes you got to take your sweet time with it, because usually I like to read one book a week, but with books like War and Peace,
you can't read War and Peace in a week, mate.
No.
It's like, I couldn't do it. Like, it's like 1,100 pages. Bearing in mind that Lord of the Rings is split into 3 books, and it's a total around 1,000 to 1,100 pages altogether. So
I actually, Mitch, you all know this because I actually watched a film about the Decembrists, a Russian film, which was pretty good actually. I think I mentioned it on the Discord. It's quite good, and you can find it on YouTube if you look for it. Do you remember what it's called?
Union of Salvation. That's what the Decembrists called themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
It's worth noting. It's worth noting. So the Decembrist revolt was basically like some elements of the Russian army tried to do a Russian version of the French Revolution. Some of the plotters, a guy called Ryliev, actually was talking about just wiping out the entire Romanov family. And when you look into the whole thing, you're just on the same side as Tsar Nicholas I, same Tsar who was in charge back when Russia went through the Crimean War. But there's a lot of myths about it. Like, people think, oh well, these guys were wholesome people. Oh, they just wanted to modernize Russia. No, a lot of them were basically bloodthirsty proto-Bolsheviks, akin to the original French Revolution. So, I know it's not just about. So the main 5 guys were executed. They were originally meant to be quartered, but Tsar Nicholas commuted that to hanging. So, and also the families of those executed were given public education on the public purse. So there was a lot of mercy given to the families, but the plotters themselves were either killed off or exiled to Siberia. So that's that, because there's this overall myth that someone like Tsar Nicholas, who he started the concept of Russian autocracy as we know it, like in terms of autocracy, and nationality, as Apostolic Majesty would say. And there's a lot of myths about it going, oh, well, this guy was completely backward. He basically treated his empire like the Mongolians' empire treated their empire. Nah, it's,
it was more complicated than that, for sure.
Yeah, like the guy, it's, for example, on one hand, you can say Russia lags behind. However, under Tsar Nicholas, he also built the first railways. Didn't build enough, because you'd have a railway from Moscow to Kiev, but from Kiev to the Crimea, you'd have to march all the way on foot, which you can imagine. That's one problem the Russians had in the war, is logistics, even in their own bloody backyard.
Sonny Jim in the chat is saying, where's our token Yank, aka Aubrey Alley, conspicuous by her absence the last few weeks? She's actually going to be joining us on the stream shortly, Sonny Jim. She had to take her dad's dog to the vet, and he's fine, I'm happy to say. And she's going to join us shortly. So if you want to know about Aubrey Alley, she'll be on the stream soon.
I was just thinking back to War and Peace. I think, who was it? The one of the main characters, Count. What was it? Pierre Bushkov.
Bushkov, I think his name was. He's I've only watched the Sergei Bondarchuk version. I've also watched the 2016 version, I believe it was, with Paul Dano. I prefer Bondarchuk's version, especially there's that scene where it goes on for like 5 minutes, but it's basically all these Russian soldiers praying towards the sacred icon, Our Lady of Smolensk, whereas the 2016 version doesn't really have that. So I consider Bondarchuk's version.
He's kind of he starts off as a bit of in the books as well. He is he's sort of like fascinated with the Napoleonic Code, the revolutionary spirit. I guess you could say he sort of flirts with a Decembrist attitude, but then he sort of quickly grows out of it, as the story unfolds.
It's also worth pointing out, AI, that Tsar Paul himself, I think it was Tsar Paul, wasn't it, in 1812?
Yeah.
Pavel died in 1801 after being assassinated. After him was Tsar Alexander, dealing with Napoleon.
But he was actually originally quite a fan of Napoleon. There was the famous meeting at Tilsit where they met on a barge in the middle of the river. And it was only gradually after this, when Napoleon gets more and more whingy, basically, about the Russians still trading with Britain and what have you, that because, Napoleon wanted Russia to be part of his continental system, which never worked very well because people wanted British goods, and so therefore they used to take them, they'd buy them. And it was that really caused Napoleon to invade in 1812 with the disastrous consequences for him.
One thing about I know Tsar Alexander, he was a liberal initially. He wanted to do a lot of reforms, like do what his nephew Alexander II did in terms of abolishing serfdom. But after the Napoleonic War, especially the invasion, Tsar Alexander pivots a lot more to being a lot more conservative, orthodox ruler, and so that's one thing worth bearing in mind. Is that you had a lot of Francophilia, because one thing I think Tolstoy touches on this. A lot of Russian officers actually ended up getting friendly killed inadvertently because they would often speak French with one another because this was the court language, and the Russian muzhik soldiers, muzhik meaning like peasants, misunderstood these French-speaking officers of theirs as being Frenchmen themselves or French spies. So
yeah, like French was always the language of the Tsar's court, I believe. I mean, even up to Nicholas, who was executed by the Reds.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, introduced by Peter the Great, really, the French being used as a language, and down to even like changes in court behaviour, more adopting of a less of a sort of Oriental type and more of a European, French and European style.
yeah.
I mean,
So-
Mitch, would you say that Peter the Great was? He's very much viewed today as this like liberal reformer in Russia, but I just view him as just saying, I'm not interested in like the Eastern culture. I want to be more European and just look westward. I don't know if he.
Because the one thing about the
really liberal.
Yeah, because the thing about the boyars was they would all take pride in being descended from like Tatar warlords from the Golden Horde, and Tsar Peter would just found that disgusting. Like he just thought, no, we should be pivoting towards Europe. You got to factor that Peter the Great, ironically, was the last full-blooded Russian Romanov ruler. After him, they all intermixed with other Germans, French, and British royalty. For example, by the time you have Tsar Nicholas, Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar, he was only like 3% Russian. The vast majority of his DNA otherwise was German, French, and British. And it's also worth noting, it wasn't just French. Tsar Nicholas, he would often talk to his wife, Alexandra, in English because she didn't speak French or Russian that well, and they would often do their letters. And so this is why also you have Anastasia and Tatiana. They would often speak to their mother using English as opposed to Russian. As for what Black Pigeon was talking about, why have our least hated one another? I would say back in the 19th century, Russian elites would often hire English governesses. So every Russian aristocrat probably would have spoken English to a certain extent. They would have learned English from their governesses.
But they also, Mitch, had quite a lot of German descent officers, didn't they? In the army.
Yeah, Baltic German, or in the case of Mannerheim in Finland, Swedish. Although that was a bit of a late thing. The Baltic Germans. Apparently, is not on. Peter the Great actually got a rollicking off some of his boyars because he kept giving a lot of positions out to the Baltic Germans. Because the thing was, before that, the Russians had a system was called mercenaries, which was seniority based on how far you could trace back your family history. So, in other words, if you're a Russian noble family, like the Romanovs, and you could trace your descent to the Rurikids, the previous ruling dynasty, you'd be given privileges that other lesser known and less storied, less glorious noble houses would get in terms of like civil service jobs and the like. Peter the Great, he gets rid of this and he gives a lot of positions out to the Baltic Germans. This caused a lot of angst among the boyars, but they end up lumping it because the Baltic Germans, they were quite skilled. I mean, one of the most capable prime ministers Russia had in that period was Sergei Witte, who built up the Transylvanian Railway. He was kind of like the Russian version of Lord Salisbury, I suppose you could say.
One of the guys we'll talk about on our Crimean War history stream next week will be Todleben, the Russian general. He was German descent, and he was an engineer, and it was his brilliant engineering that enabled the Russians to hold out as long as they did in Sevastopol.
It's also
Yeah.
interesting to note, as Mitch mentioned the Ruriks. Again, the Ruriks were of Norse descent. They were Norse, that sort of united the sort of Eastern Slavs, tribes and conquer, found Kiev. And you find that in Russian history that the Russians are usually governed by Germanics or some sort of foreign house. Probably the Romans, even the Romanovs themselves, were the exception because they would then go on to intermarry. And you see it with like the Iranians, for example. Most of their history, they've been, or after I should, their great changes are usually non-Persian, so other Iranians from the east, or Turkic or Mongolian. They're sort of governed by, for large period of time, not by the sort of their own ethnic group.
Well, the ancient Greeks called them the Medes because that was a part of Persia, but it wasn't all of it. It was just a bit of it. But I mean, Black Pigeon Pilled is saying the Scots have a glittering history in Russia, and I mean, in the Crimean War, there was a farm where the British commander-in-chief was almost captured by the Russians, and it was Mackenzie's farm, and that was a Scottish settler in the Crimea.
It was during, to go back to Peter the Great, when he was recreating the Russian army. I believe there was a Scottish veteran. I forgot his name. I forget his name now, but he was used as he was sort of like took a position and then was like creating this new Russian army. I'm gonna look up his name.
Well,
But
Napoleon also had a Scottish, a very good Scottish general who was, I think his family were like, they supported Bonnie Prince Charlie, and that's why they ended up in France.
right, yeah.
But no, you can find plenty of Scots guys and other people scattered around in that part of the world for sure.
Yeah, it's there's
All
like
the
a
Goths of Crimea.
yeah, and it's also worth noting Crimea used to be called North Anglia, like New England, from the Anglo-Saxons who moved there after William the Conqueror took over. So, like, there was that. I mean, I can't remember the name of the museum, but there's a museum in Moscow that was designed by a guy called Vladimir Sherwood. He was a son of a guy called William Sherwood, who was because in the 19th century, quite a few Englishmen were hired. Because you have the city of Donetsk, which in Ukrainian is called Yuzivka, because it's named after a guy called John Hughes, a Welsh industrialist. And then there were cases of like English engineers or financiers or people of that sort who would help to build Russia in the 19th century, because at that time there was just a lot of Anglophilia among a lot of Russian aristocrats, even though there was also the Great Game playing out in Central Asia. So it's kind of like there was no malice on the part of either side, really, in this chapter of geopolitical rivalry. Whereas nowadays, I just think it's a matter of nowadays both sides treat it as existential, in that Putin sees stuff like Ukraine as existential struggle for Russia, because because a lot of NGOs, for example, were promoting all the gay liberal crap back in the 90s and early 2000s before Putin banned it. And also, a lot of Russians blame us for the fall of the Soviet Union, as well as stuff like what Yeltsin had done, rightly or wrongly, because I haven't looked into that massively.
I've seen that blame, and I'm going to be honest. I think that's just cope. And there was There was actually a documentary by Adam Curtis where there's no narration. It's just footage of 80s, you know, 80s to late 80s, Soviet industry society structure. And you can just see, and whether it's I think what happened was the communist bureaucracy just came down around itself. I mean, I will say that the reforms, perestroika, by Gorbachev and everything, definitely helped. Helped it push it, because the Soviet lost authority, and as it's not like there wasn't like any rival group in the Soviet Union building up to this. What just happened is it just collapsed. And I mean, there was a great bit of this industry. It was like some sort of steelworks or something in uh, out eastwards of Moscow, and you have like there it doesn't like the workers didn't know what they were doing by day to day. There was hardly any like electricity to run. It wasn't making a profit, and you had like the board of and you had the people on the board of making decisions had no sort of knowledge of the industry, but because they were part of like the local communist party. And so I do while I was watching it, Mitch, I did actually think, it kind of seems like in this country we have today, where we have all these quango bureaucracies. Is the quango system was far more incompetent in some ways in the Soviet Union than is here. I mean, and it's pretty bad here. I mean, it's terrible here now. But yeah,
Yeah, I would say
I'm going
with
to be reluctant to argue with Mitch about Russian history, but I would just say there was a hell of a lot of corruption in late Soviet Union and early post-communist Russia. There was a lot of corruption. Sorry,
yeah,
Mitch.
I would say this is one word that Morgoth would be interested in, is a concept of Vanyur. Vanyur basically means the system constantly lies to everyone and to itself about a problem. They keep on lying to a point where everyone knows there's a problem, but everyone just carries on with a lie because no one wants to solve a problem. So when you have stuff like the RBMK reactors having a problem with them, and eventually it sparks it into Chernobyl, it has to reach that point before the state starts thinking, okay, we've got a problem here. And suppose you could say same with rape gangs, for example. But the other thing was one thing that's often I hear a lot of Russians say, like, they blame us for some of the privatization stuff because of stuff like the IMF and blah blah blah. The original plan was a guy called Grigory Yavlinsky. Now, Yavlinsky has an early life background, shall we say, and yeah, Yavlinsky, he had this idea of, oh, well, Russia can go from Soviet command economy to all of a sudden free market capitalist in 500 days. Yeltsin implements it, and the entire thing just goes arse over tip. Because the problem is, Poland and Czech Republic, for example, or Czechoslovakia at the time, they could do shock therapy privatization schemes because in the case of Poland, they still had privatized agriculture because they never collectivized it there. And they had farmers markets, which acted as a template by which the rest of the Polish economy could pivot towards a more capitalist setting. Russia, however, they've been communist for over 75 years. By that point, you can't go from Soviet command economy that you've had for over 70 years to all of a sudden becoming free market capitalist in a country where no one knows how to run a business. Like, it should have been done a lot more gradually, but the Russian leaders, especially Yeltsin, who had a massive Yankophilia, who saw American supermarkets and just thought speed run to that, it just screwed everything up, and the Russians just massively struggled. As for corruption, yeah, there was plenty of corruption before and after, because you got to factor the only people who knew how to run anything close to a factory were those people who already embedded in the Soviet system beforehand. So they are the ones who are just collecting all the assets and just selling them off to anyone willing to buy. And this is why you get entire cities just like they become worse in areas like Sheffield in the 90s, industrially speaking.
Well, there was I remember there was an article reading back. I think it was Peter Hitchens actually, who talked about like in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had like daily shootouts in the city of Vladimir between gangs, like mafia, like Russian mafia gangs, who were like ex-communist types who were carving up the city.
Yeah, there's a Russian TV. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a Russian TV series that came out. It was a massive hit a year ago or two, and it's just all about criminal gangs in the mid to late 80s, and everything was falling to crap even then. But everyone knows the 90s in Russia as a wild 90s because everything just became lawlessness. Like the police weren't paid.
Yeah.
The police were in the pocket of the mafia. A lot of the mafia, by the way, early life background types, shall we say.
Constance Kissin's father.
Yeah,
indeed. He's a good example.
Yeah, a lot of the time, certain jobs, like public sector jobs, would just be paid in bottles of vodka rather than actual money because the currency was worthless. And you'd have stuff like, engineers who designed aeroplanes now having to sell off all their valuables just to afford a loaf of bread. Like it was worse than Weimar Germany back in the 90s for Russia. So
yeah, they had a very bad time. I mean, you can watch any of the Bald and Bankrupt videos where he's going around parts of Russia before he was banned because his mate was too pro-Ukrainian. He interviews older people, and the older people always turn around and say, yeah, it was much better under the communists, just because they earned better money and they weren't struggling so much.
Yeah.
I remember there was, I was going to say, I remember that story of a textile factory. Again, this is after the fall of the collapse of the Soviet Union. They couldn't pay the workers, but instead gave them shares, like in the shares in the company or something like that.
Yeah, there's a voucher scheme because in Czechoslovakia they gave everyone a voucher saying, okay, you can invest in your company with this voucher and it's worth X amount of money. The problem was, in the case of Russia, no one knows how shares work. Like, no one knows how to take risks with stuff like that. So what you had was you just have like these factory owners. They just say, okay, give me your voucher and I'll invest on your behalf and I'll give you a fair share of the profits. So everyone just gets defrauded by basically the middle bureaucrat types in the Soviet system. And this is how, for example, the average babushka down the road, she gets peanuts off the state. She has to rely entirely on selling her valuables. Meanwhile, 40-year-old Mikhail, who before the Soviet Union collapsed owned a factory, was a mid-rank manager for a factory, he's the richest man in your local town because he's just defrauded everyone of their vouchers. I don't know how to explain. Like I don't know how to describe the 90s for people, other than to say it was just wild. Like everything was just incompetent. Nothing ever went right, and you understand why Putin is so popular amongst people who grew up or lived through the 90s.
Yeah, he managed to put the country back on its feet, more or less.
There's sure. I mean, if people, I would say a good film or a couple of films that show 90s Russia it's Michael Caine, the Harry Palmer series. One I believe is Midnight in St. Petersburg, and the other one is Bullet to Beijing. That one, if you want to see like peak wild 90s Russia, those two films are quite good.
I haven't seen those. I'll have to check them out.
Yeah,
it's really it's quite good, those ones. It just shows like you have like in Russia, like at these bars, because he's like an ex British agent, and you got like ex like KGB and ex CIA, because they're all like retired or out of a job, and so they're just like milling around like bars in Russia, cooking up schemes and working for criminal groups that and things like that.
Yeah, and you got to bear in mind St. Petersburg is the most European city. Like, it's the most beloved city in terms of the aesthetics. So when even that was a cackhole back in the 90s, that kind of tells you how bad Russia was in the world 90s. Because nowadays, like, everyone looks at St. Petersburg and goes, "Oh yeah, that's the most beautiful Russian city." And I've heard of Russians anecdotally, like, if they were to have to pick between Moscow or St. Petersburg, they would choose St. Petersburg hands down because it's got a more of a European aesthetic to it. It feels like more European.
Petersburg is certainly a beautiful city. I've watched a lot of stuff in St. Petersburg, like documentaries and things, and it's definitely a beautiful city for sure. Yes, damn cold in the winter though.
Yeah, the other thing about St. Petersburg, like they'll around this time of year, they have what's called white nights, where it never turns dark, even at like 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, they're not that far from the Arctic Circle, are they?
No, it wouldn't be.
No.
Yeah, and it's yeah. What's funny about it is, like, so the old blast is still called Leningrad, but the city has since changed its name to St. Petersburg, which I find funny.
Well, it's changed its name quite a few times, hasn't it, Mitch? Originally it was St. Petersburg, and then it became
Petrograd.
Petrograd,
right, and then Leningrad for a while, and then it went back to St. Petersburg.
Yeah. I mean, I know Hitman. He's doing streams about like modern Iran. I'm brainstorming, but I wouldn't say no. I might think about doing streams on my channel where it's just all about detailing modern Russia in terms of like.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, I'd watch that for sure.
Yeah, because so Putin in the early to mid 90s, he worked in St. Petersburg under a guy called Anatoly Sobchak, who was a mayor at the time, and because the thing was, up until 96, yeah, Putin worked in St. Petersburg, basically as like a mid-rank to upper rank echelon bureaucrat type. Because you got back to when Putin served in the KGB, he'd be interrogating or he'd be doing paperwork. He would be doing James Bond kind of stuff. So this is where Putin from 96 onward, because this is a common theme about Russian history, where if they have a massive change, like a revolution or something, or like or new Tsar communism, or as a means of their consolidation, they bring in guys called what's called the Siloviki, the security forces types like Putin, to stabilize and consolidate power. Now Yeltsin, there's a lot of people like, it's not conspiratorial to say Yeltsin was pushed. He didn't. Perhaps he got tired of power, but he was also pushed out in favor of Putin because the Second Chechen War was kicking off, and the state was of that position where if they went for another few more years of Yeltsin, the country would have fallen apart to a point where it just balkanized. But you had certain regions like Tatarstan and Bashkiria just wanted to break up. As for
people are not always accurate about Putin as well, because people will say correctly that Putin was in the KGB back in the day, but he was a lawyer in the KGB. He wasn't someone who went around shooting people in the back of the head. He was a lawyer,
He was in East Germany. He was in the East German branch.
Or is it just me?
Hello?
I can hear you, Mitch.
Hello? Yeah, I can.
Yeah, I can hear you, Mitch.
Can you hear me, Iron Duke?
Yep, I can.
Yeah.
Mitch, you're muted at the moment, Mitch.
Unless he's having signal problems.
Yeah, he's actually muted at the moment. Hang on, maybe he's going to come back. Wait a minute.
Yeah. Actually, one thing.
Putin was a KGB lawyer. Is the truth of it?
Yeah, in East Germany, as well. He was in the East German branch. Yeah, I will say though, like, part of his rise is he did surround himself with like colleagues that he knew from his KGB days. Definitely, he did surround himself with those guys.
But you're going to do that, aren't you? I mean,
Yeah, and let's be honest,
nepotism used to be a thing in all countries,
Yeah, I mean, who's going to win? The drunk who can barely stand up, or the organized group of ex KGB types?
Yep.
Who's going to win?
Yeah. Another thing. So you have to answer Black Pigeon why all Eurasian are dominated. This is also another theme of Russian history where you have like a pendulum where 1 minute you have someone like Peter the Great who massively pivots towards the West, and then later on you'll have someone else who, or let's say it might be the same ruler, who pivots towards a more autocratic. I don't want to say like massively Oriental, but the kind of you are factor like in some ways Putin rules over Russia like the golden horde, because even like city mayors and regional governors, they're not elected by the people, they're directly appointed by the president, i.e. Putin. So that's one thing to bear in mind with Russia. It's kind of like it's a very you'd have, let's say, I don't know, like MP, like you have what they're called like you have a Duma, which is essentially their parliament. Yeah, your voting goes for that. But in terms of, like, let's say, city mayors, perhaps, or as well as regional governors, they'd be directly appointed in a similar way to how the Mongolian Empire would have, like, let's say, local commanders who'd be elected by the men, but divisional commanders and higher up would be directly chosen by the Khan. So this is one common thing with Russian history where, because you got factors, they're influenced by two empires, the Eastern Romans, which is where they get their alphabet, their Cyrillic script, as well as Orthodoxy from. But at the same time, the Mongolian Empire did affect them deeply in terms of elements of statecraft. So someone like Putin not having the same tradition as us about how to rule the country. I think Viktor Orban said it best. The top priority for a Russian ruler is keeping the country together. Freedom is great, but that's a second priority. Freedom's great, but keeping the country is a first priority. This is why Putin has to be a lot more autocratic compared to how we would rule ourselves in this country.
On the other hand, Mitch, I think it's also worth pointing out that if you look at guys and women who are put into prison for tweets and so on, Britain probably has more political prisoners than Russia. And Britain is not as big a country as Russia, and it has a much smaller population. Yeah, if you're going to look at people who are put into jail for tweets and things they might post on Facebook and this sort of stuff, Britain probably has more political prisoners than Russia does, to be honest.
Well, I mean, ask yourself this: if a Russian went onto the street to preach the Bible, from on any random street in Russia, what's the likelihood
anyone would care, to be honest?
Yeah, and even if somebody did care, like, what's the likelihood he would be arrested? I mean, maybe if he was, like, say, on private property and somebody had an issue, maybe the police would just say, "Listen, can you just move along? Just go like further down the road or something." But then look at what happens here. You stand in the outside or in like some sort of zone, and you're not even praying. You're just like you're in your head, and it's like, sorry, no, you're under arrest now.
Yeah. Oh, you're opposite. You're opposite a mosque, or you're opposite an abortion clinic or something. Yeah. 6 months.
6 months. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing. So Russia, this is one thing where they are moving in the right direction. Because the Russian constitution, they amended it a couple of years back, saying the Russians, or the ethnic Russians, are the state-building element of a Russian nation. So in other words, they get certain. But if they're not first among equals, they're certainly top of. They'll be top of priorities according to the state. So Russia, its constitution, it's kind of like soft ethnic. Because on one hand, they can't be full on like privileging ethnic Russians 100% of the time because they've got 200 different ethnic groups. But at the same time, I'll go, look, we have the Russian people, as in the ethnic concept of Russian people. There would be no Russia, and all these minorities would fight each other and massacre each other.
I tell you what, Mitch, if you watch videos from today, like modern videos of St. Petersburg or Moscow, they look a damn sight more white than London does, or Birmingham. So,
Yeah, the only thing about Russia is where was I going to go? Black Pigeon said about Britain, like we Brits supporting the Turkish. I'll talk about that more on Wednesday, but I will say
that's why I didn't talk about it, Mitch. I was going to say the same thing.
All I will say
is
about
Britain defending Istanbul, or rather, as it then was, Constantinople against Russia, you need to watch our Wednesday stream on the Crimean War because it's going to be about that.
Yeah, all I will say is, and I don't want to spoil it, but I will say the Russians, they misread our thoughts about it. Because they thought, oh, well, we were pro-Islam or something. No, we weren't. It was a lot more nuanced than that. We weren't defending the Turks for the pure sake of it. We were just doing it for reasons that the Russians couldn't understand. So,
yes, very true. Can I also say to Sonny Jim in the chat, Sonny Jim, I'm sure you know very well that Wikipedia is not a good source for stuff. So the fact that Wiki says he was a foreign intelligence officer means fuck all. But I'm sure you know that.
I would caveat that with saying a lot of that period, because he did serve in Dresden, but we don't know what he did there.
Yeah, but basically he was a KGB lawyer. That was what he was trained for.
Yeah, he would have been trained more in interrogation techniques. He wouldn't be doing any James Bond stuff by that way.
No, he wasn't. This is what I said. He wasn't going around shooting people in the back of the head or anything like that. That was not what he was doing. Not at all. But yeah, good evening, Aubrey Alley. How are you going?
Hi guys. Sorry I'm late.
That's all right. I told people you had to take your father's dog to the vet.
Yeah, we've been swimming a lot, and it's affecting his ears a little bit. So we got some stuff to clean out his ears, so he doesn't have an infection.
This is the dog, the golden retriever she's talking about, by the way.
Hunter.
Yep. He's a lovely dog, but you'll find most of the people in my chat are dog lovers, so it's perfectly understandable you're going to be late to take your dad's dog to the vet.
That's an acceptable excuse, huh?
That's an acceptable excuse. We are at the moment talking about Russia.
I heard you talking about Putin. I kind of disagree with you. I'm not sure that's the thinking of the majority of the population, but I'm pretty sure
I don't think
he was pretty deep into the KGB. And maybe he wasn't running around shooting people, but he ordered some murders we know of. So
I don't know that we know that at all, actually, Aubrey Alley. But
okay. You don't think that he has?
Baby, look. All I would say to you is this: look, if he did order people to get shot, which I agree is a possibility, do you not think that the guys in the CIA or in MI5 in Britain don't do exactly the same thing?
Right.
Of course
no, absolutely.
So he wasn't doing anything our guys don't do.
I mean, in terms of the KGB he's doing in the 70s and 80s, again, a lot of that is just stuff that Putin himself hides, so we don't fully know the story, and a lot of it's up to conjecture. I will say that Putin, he probably has had people killed back when he was president. For example, so in 99, I believe it was, there was a bunch of apartment bombings, and this was used as a reason to go to war in Chechnya. Now, it probably was true that the FSB, who are basically Russian FBI and CIA combined, they probably were responsible for the bombing. And some journalists, like one called Anna Politkovskaya, she got killed for it. I don't really know that. Putin probably had her killed off. But at the same time, it's one of the things also where Putin is popular because especially the Gen Xers and Boomers, they remember what Russia was like before he came to power, and they just appreciate the stability. Yeah, they probably have complaints, but they just go, well, look, we remember what it was like before him, and we'd rather have him now, warts and all, rather than the wild 90s all over again.
Just before you joined us, Aubrey Ali, I was also pointing out the true fact that Britain, which only has about a third of the population of Russia, actually has more political prisoners. In terms of if you post,
don't you think that's because you don't know about a lot of the political prisoners?
No, it's not. It's because if you post in Britain online, say on X, on Twitter, or on Facebook, and you say something even vaguely anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant or whatever it might be, you can get anywhere between 3 months and 2 years in prison.
Essentially, if you hurt anyone's feelings, that isn't right.
Russia doesn't do that. If you post something online in Russia, providing it's not saying, I want to kill Putin or something like that, you don't get into trouble in Russia for doing that.
You're taking a big leap. I respect you and I learn a lot from you, but I have to say that I think you're taking a big leap because, again, apples don't equal oranges here.
All right. I will ask
my opinion. You can
I'll just ask Mitch and AI.
Okay.
Do you think there is more freedom of speech in Russia, providing you're not attacking the government?
Well, right. That's
reality, please.
All right.
AI and Mitch, do you think there is probably more real freedom of speech in Russia, providing you're not directly attacking the government, than there is in the UK?
Yeah, I'd say there's more. I'd say there's more in the sense of, so for example, in Russia, you can just full-fledged say, okay, Russian, you can be a Russian woman saying, okay, you don't want to date black people or you don't want to date brown people, and you can say that and not get in any trouble. You don't get social ostracized for it or anything. You couldn't say that over here. Or, for example, let's say, in the case of slagging and Putin, I mean, you can do it if you're just one person by yourself in your own house. Not Putin isn't gonna shit the bed just because you're slagging him off. It's another thing if you're someone like Alexei Navalny, who's got somewhat of a following, or something of amount of funds, and is in a position to challenge you to some degree. This is all, although Putin, in terms of the system itself, I mean, someone like Yevgeny Prigozhin would be more of a threat to him really than Navalny, because you got to factor. A lot of Westerners don't realize that Navalny is hated because, for example, he has I think it's on Bitcoin or something. He had a Bitcoin account. Now, Russians, they distrust anyone with that kind of thing because after the 90s, they don't trust. If you have something on you that's financial that they don't understand, their first instinct is to think of you as a crook or just think of you as suspicious.
That's probably not a bad idea, actually. But
yeah, it can be seen as paranoid, but on the other hand, it's like, well, it's one of the things where after how bad the Russians were dealt a short hand dealing with basically trying to convert themselves from command economy all of a sudden to free market capitalism in the 90s. They're just distrusting of anything they don't understand regarding the economy or finance. So,
what do you think? I know you and I have discussed many times how easy it is to get thrown into jail in Britain for tweets, basically. That doesn't happen in Russia, so far as I can see.
Oh my God!
It just doesn't.
Well, I mean, the stark difference is, Aubrey, is that the elites in Russia today, Putin and his pals, are in favour of, the people in their own country. They're in favour of their own people.
True in Britain. That is certainly not true in Britain.
It's not true. It's not just straight up not true in Britain. So from a perspective, if a Russian traditionalist was to go about their day promoting Russian culture, history, basically promoting it, and if there's any like foreign, hostile, alien element that was in there in Russia, say like an African or a Jamaican or something went there and brought up there, and then went on a stage at a music festival saying that you want your country back, go fuck yourself, and a Russian podcaster was to go and call him the N-word and tell him to go the fuck back to where he comes from, there'd probably be zero repercussions by the Russian state.
100%.
If I had said that now, though, and I'm very tempted, I would want it. I know if I went out on the street and said that, or if I ever put that on Facebook or something under my real name to say that, I know what would happen. Everyone would know what would happen. I would be hauled
you'd
up.
have 3 woman cops arriving at your door. AI.
Exactly. So,
but you
from
can't
that,
take this one small issue that you guys are. I mean, I'm not saying it's small. Like freedom of speech is a huge. Obviously, I mean, I'm an American. That's
We don't have the
But
Second
that's-
Amendment in Britain or reality.
I know you don't, but the thing is, and I agree with that, but you can't take that small little.
It's not small, baby.
No, I'm not saying it's
really important. I'm sorry.
I just said I have a full appreciation for freedom of speech. I'm an American. It's a big deal, but you can't take that one piece of government management, I guess, and apply that in whole then to everything that Putin does. How do you think Putin got into power? Do you think he did that by just
got elected?
guy?
Got elected.
Yeah.
One thing.
Because elections are really fair in Russia.
Aubrey, sorry, Mitch. Sorry, Aubrey. How do you think the American Sons of Liberty got what they wanted in the colonies, in the 13 colonies? How did America come into being?
They stood up and fought.
Okay, but what happened to the Tory politicians and ordinary Tory patriots in America?
You mean the loyalists or reality?
The loyalists, yeah, just ordinary people who were killed by them.
I understand when a government is overthrown. I get that there are going to be people that are killed. I mean, I get that, but I don't know. I'm not going to win this argument with you guys, but I stand behind.
You're outnumbered 3-1. You're not going to win.
Such a shit.
All right, guys. Before I ask Aubrey Ali for her subject for this evening, could I just say thank you very much to Gerin, who has given us $5 and just says hello. Gerin donates to this channel just about every week or every show we do. So thank you very much, Gerin. It's much appreciated. And as I said earlier, every penny that we get that way, which is not that much, but what we get all goes back into the channel. So thank you, Gerin. That's very kind of you. And I don't know what your name is on the chat in YouTube because it's different to Gerin, but thank you very much anyway.
I would say to one thing you got to factor with Russia is they've got a different priority compared to Americans. Because in America, your main the main thing you focus on is freedom, which is fair enough because that's always been the heritage of America since day one, really. In Russia, however, they claim their state president from Ivan Terrible, and their main priority is stability.
That's a very good point. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, so it's like Viktor Orban probably says it best when he says Russian leaders, Russian leaders would like to have freedom. They'd like to have it if they can, but it's not the top priority. It's all about keeping the country together, which you got to factor. Russia's got 200 different ethnic groups who would all slaughter each other if you had anything like the 90s to happen again in Russia. So someone like Putin, you always have to have someone like Putin at the helm, because you can't have someone like it's like if there was to be a Russian version of Donald Trump, they would not be so democratic or so very freedom oriented in the same way that Trump is. Like, they'd be oriented a slightly different way.
I would also say, like, I follow two Australians who live in Russia. One of them's a girl who's married to a Russian dude, and one of them is just an Aussie guy who lives there. And they seem to live a perfectly nice, ordinary life and don't have any issues. And they run YouTube channels and they talk about politics sometimes, not very often, but mostly they talk about, normal life, and it seems pretty damn normal as far as I can see,
I agree. I mean, I would definitely rather be a Russian now than I would have wanted to be 40, 50 years ago, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Red wine would have been fun in the cold. So,
and also, let us not forget, Putin was also I know Trump's done it now, but Putin was the first leader of a European nation to offer asylum to Afrikaners from South Africa. As I say, Trump's done that now, but he's only recently done it, whereas Putin did that some years ago. And no one else has.
Most people aren't going to get to that level of power and have clean hands. I mean, I don't think anyone does.
No. I mean, babe, what do you think happened in the election where Biden won? Do you reckon that was a clean election?
God, no. No,
well,
but, I mean, that was.
There you go. So
I would say the Clintons
say the same thing,
right?
Military theorist in the chat brings up a good point. Endeavor, who is a friend of the channel and has been on this channel several times, he works in Russia. He's a Canadian dude, and he doesn't particularly like going back to Canada because it depresses him, because he's a Canadian patriot, and the Canadian government, just like the British government, are destroying their own country. At least you can say Putin isn't doing that,
Right. And I do think that, I mean, this is a huge problem that we're facing with our country, your country, Canada, where, we're losing being a nation. And I know you and I have discussed that before, that is something Putin does have as a priority. I'm not saying that he hasn't done some good things. I mean, he has, but I just wouldn't put him up such a pedestal.
All reality, all I'm trying to say is Putin is not Putla. He's not
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I will say because you assess Putin in terms of leaders. I mean, he's similar to Tsar Nicholas I, because Tsar Nicholas is put down as being a massive aggressive reactionary, blah blah blah, and it's like, so Putin didn't have to climb a mountain to corpse like Stalin did in order to get to power. Like Stalin, I mean, like, you take Putin, he's not innocent, like he's not got clean hands, but compared to a lot of Russian rulers historically, like Ivan Materbo or Stalin or Lenin, like Putin is probably one of the most humane leaders you'll get in terms of body count. That's one thing to assess rightly in terms of Putin is, because Putin often says, so one thing that Putin does with his opponents is he would just say, okay, you, let's say, own this platform, social media platform, or you own this oil company or something. Okay, I will pay you X amount of money if you just give up your shares in all businesses within Russia and you bugger off to somewhere like London. So pretty much exile and permanent exclusion from the Russian political scene. That's a lot more humane compared to what someone like Lenin or Stalin or Ivan Materbo would do to their political opponents.
Totally agree with that.
Military theorist makes the point that Putin is much more akin to somebody like Mussolini, who really didn't do mass killings. That wasn't Mussolini's style at all. Despite how much people like to malign him these days, he didn't. He even had many Jewish supporters of the fascist party. It was quite common, actually in Italy.
Yeah, I'm in favor of our countries being able to, have an actual, like, for us to actually have a country we can call our own, to have a culture, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think
right.
every people in the world deserves their own country, and Britain, for example, is not allowed that. Anglo-Celtic people in Britain are not allowed our own country because we are supposed to give it up to mass immigration. And in America, you don't have quite the same problem as the Brits do.
Although look at what's happening right now.
But you certainly do with Latin Americans, etc.
Right. That's what I was just going to say. Yeah. Look at what's happening right now with all these riots. It's ridiculous.
I mean, I've watched some of these riots. The supposed No King riots and all this stuff, and it's just amazing to me that all these Latinos who want to stay in America go around waving Mexican flags.
I know.
They're so pro-American, they wave Mexican flags, which is the country they're desperate not to be sent back to.
The irony. I mean, I will say, you want to talk about like a corrupt country like Mexico is a perfect example. So I will say Russia has a very high score compared to Mexico. But I don't blame people for wanting to leave Mexico. It's just that's not our responsibility to fix everybody's problems. So
I would say if Trump were to copy bomb Mexico, I'll be on his side on that one. Because
say that again.
If Trump were to copy bomb Mexico, I'd support him.
I know. Because there's a lot of trouble coming from there with the drugs and the.
Yeah, and the Mexican government literally covers the cartels. Like the cartels and the government on the same side.
Right.
Because loads of editors actually say, but the current Mexican president, that Scheinbaum woman, she was mayor of Mexico City, and she said to the cartels, "Okay, can you stop murdering people? Because the murder rate is getting really high." So they just log all these murders henceforth out as disappearances. So then that way they can't find the body, and therefore can't put it down as a murder. That's how they bring down the murder rate in Mexico City.
That's sick. And to live like that, I can't even imagine. Those people are just terrorized by these gangs. I mean, yeah, the things they do are terrible. And I just watched that movie, didn't I, Duke? What was it? What's the
Sicario?
Movie? Sicario, yeah. I just watched the second one, which, by the way, wow, the ending. I don't want to give it away to anybody, but I really like Benicio del Toro.
They're making a third one of those at the moment. It's going to come out later this year or early next year. I don't know.
I don't know what country he's from. I know he's not Mexican.
He's Spanish.
He's from Spain? I think he's from South Africa or something, isn't he?
Yeah, Del Toro, I think that's Spanish name, like the Castilian one. As to answering how many, one thing to bear in mind is the last Mexican election had like 204 presidential candidates killed off by the cartels.
Good Lord, that's crazy.
Because the thing was, either it was guys who were saying, "Oh, I'm going to get rid of the cartels," so they get killed, or it was there'd be guys where, let's say, they'd be supporting El Chapo, only to get killed by one of El Chapo's rivals, or the third category would be guys who didn't say anything about the cartels, and the cartels just kill them anyway because they think can't trust this guy. It's
Aubrey Alley, be careful you never get a Mexican necktie.
Oh, I know, right? So this is kind of an interesting story, I think. A doctor that I worked with when I was working for a vascular surgeon, he was like, he was from maybe it was Peru, but he became very wealthy, wealthy physician. I think his family had a lot of money, and they were pretty prominent. So like the big medical facility was his name. It was named after him. And so the cartels came after him, and they said that they were going to kill him and his family. And So they had to flee, literally had to leave everything behind, and flee like in the night, to get up here. But I mean, I just can't imagine living like that.
Yeah, there's also a famous instance where a Colombian cartel, they killed off the goalkeeper for the national team because they went against the United States in a football match, or soccer, as you would say. And because the goalkeeper didn't save a goal, like which won the Americans a match, he was killed in a car park or parking lot, as you would say.
Didn't Iraq that happen with the Iraq team as well? That
yeah, Uday. Yeah, Saddam's son Uday.
Yeah.
He said to the team, "Look, if you don't come back as victors, he'll have the guys and their families tortured to death."
Yeah, there was like an Iron Maiden situation with that. I remember because that was the first time I heard about that. I think I was in like 6th grade, and that was terrifying. Some things stand out in your mind, you know.
Aubrey Alley, did you have something you wanted to talk about this week, or was it mainly the US border?
Well, so I mean, yeah, when I sent you the message, there are quite a few things that are happening, and I don't know what you guys discussed. I'm sure you guys talked about Iran, right?
We did. We already did that. So don't do that again.
That's a pretty big deal. And then we did just touch on the No Kings little parades and riots that they're having. But the Supreme Court did side with, it was kind of a victory for Trump, limiting the limiting what others can do to try to go against executive orders. So that's a good thing. But yeah, AOC, if someone could just take her and put her somewhere far away, that would be a wonderful thing. And I guess they're saying that they think she's going to be the front runner for their party's presidential hopeful.
Well, I hope so, because I don't think people are going to vote for her.
Right. I mean, but look I can't believe half the nation almost was following Kamala. So
yeah, I don't know I don't know what you've got to say about Zoran Mamdani fella over in New York, who looks set to win.
Right. That was a surprise.
All I will say is Idi Amin was clearly right to chuck out those people in the 70s.
Yep, I agree.
So I guess the only other topic that I had was the Karen Reed trial, which I don't know if you guys are going to care about too much, but that has kind of been, for Duke and I, that's been kind of our life now.
A lot of corruption. There was a lot of corruption in
Oh my gosh. So
and there was no evidence she killed him at all, but it's not really something for this stream.
No, it's not. I know, but
pardon me saying so.
I know, that's why
it was a Boston suburb. There was an enormous amount of corruption. The good thing was Karen Reed was found not guilty by the jury, but it's not really a subject for this.
No, I know. That's why I had it last on the list. However, the reason I mention it is because I really do think you and I should do an episode to cover that, because any of you that are interested in true crime, or even just, it's just a fascinating story, frankly. I mean, there's like everything involved.
Including a lot of police corruption. Yeah, absolutely.
Corruption, sex, and there's a lot involved. It's crazy. So
like Pigeon Pill said, I'd give Ana de Armas a green card. She's practically ES, which I guess is Spanish. I used to like Salma Hayek because I'm an older guy, but I mean,
yeah,
you're talking about individual women here, guys. I mean, it's doesn't make any sense to talk that way about immigration policy.
I just think, as an American, I mean, immigration has been obviously a huge part of this country, and what they stand for, what we stand for, I guess. But, it used to be, when I was a kid, I remember learning this in school, that our teachers would tell us that the people had to apply for green cards, and that, the government would look for people who could round things out, like teachers that could come over and teach, IT things, science, whatever, experts for NASA, like they came over to give something to the country to make it better and not take. And the government, I don't know what the Democrats think that they're possibly going to do, because all they want to do is give everything away to people who aren't paying into anything, which is why the guy won in New York.
Yeah, that Zoran Mamdani, I mean, he's a peak leftist when you think about it, because who's voting for him is white hipsters, i.e. white leftists, and basically the immigrants. That's why the Democrats are flooding America with so many illegals. I think J.D. Vance talked about it, where he said, because of the amount of illegals, because you got to factor, people go, oh, well, actually, illegals can't vote. Just their presence alone, because they count as part of a population, means that California gets more electoral points than, say, Ohio.
Right.
So you basically have a situation where the Democrats are basically gerrymandering certain states to have more electoral votes. And these are deep blue states.
Well, plus the Democrats are always fighting for the immigrants that are here illegally to get to be able to have driver's licenses and to be able to, they're trying to factor this in. This is all a plan. They've known exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. But
yeah, and the only other thing
Obama
I'd say is
offering phones to everybody,
Yeah, the only other thing I'd say is America was built by settlers. I would say, like, as you think of the WASPs, like guys like Lewis and Clark are the men who built America. Like those who came. Like this is one where I think American immigration, even like 100 years ago with the Ellis Island stuff, that was pretty bad, and it really upended the national character of America. Because you got a factor of you got Italian Americans, you've got Irish Americans, you've got you don't really have Russian Americans, because I mean, but Russian.
I know you do now.
There's
you do now.
You get Brighton Beach, but I think I think Russians of attitude actually said once, like basically outside of Brighton Beach, like the Russian Americans largely assimilate, like they don't really congregate into massive blocks like the Mexicans. Right. So, like. And same goes for Ukrainians as well, because this is one thing about Ukraine is they never had a proper census since 2001, because so many Ukrainian women, especially, just went off to America to seek a fortune there, and you can imagine what they did there in terms of like mafia and stuff. But yeah, but I'd say America was meant to be, like, as Benjamin Franklin epitomized, it was meant to be a home for white Northern Europeans, specifically the British, because it's because you factor our numbers are pretty small in those days compared to now, and this land was just seen as divine providence, as a sense, like I don't, and
I was gonna say, I mentioned to you guys before, and I mentioned this to you, Aubrey. I'm reading a book by Kevin Starr, who he passed away several years ago, but he was the state librarian for California, I think under Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governator, and the governator as he's called, and he was he was basically like an urbanite Republican type, but he wasn't like a rhino. He was a through and through sort of right winger Anglophile type American, and he historically speaking, he had a very public spat with Harvey Milk back in the day, and Nancy Pelosi when she was a bit younger. So he was known, and he wrote for like I think it was the San Francisco Chronicle or something like that. But he was known in those sort of circles. But he wrote this history of California, and I call it like the last great work of American exceptionalism, where he basically says, the first government institutions set up here were, like a monastic and ranchos from Spain, but California was basically built from the ground up by English people,
Right.
by English settlers and English people. I mean, even its discovery was a large part down to Sir Francis Drake,
Right.
who landed on the shores there. And there was up until 2020 statues, parks, roads, lanes, what have you, named after Sir Francis Drake, which
Mhm.
have now been totally removed and memory hold. And bearing in mind the Spanish Mexican part of California was only like the southern part. You had that peninsula. What's it called? The beige or whatever. I don't know what you call it. The part of the California that's sort of like the peninsula that sort of sticks out, and
Down.
Southern California.
Yeah, down by San Diego. Then
San Diego. Yeah, down that way. Yeah, it all of that was Spanish, but most of Central and Northern California was either under Russian trader influence or English trader influence back then. Even because you had I mean there was even an attempt by there was even a suggestion that England might set up a colony in what's now Northern California and Oregon territory. Of course that nothing came of that, but this and what you've seen with like the riots and everything and like these like the fist bumping of this is like Mexican land. It's like, well, there were, even when it was part of Spain and Mexico, there was only about a couple hundred, maybe even 1,000 people that lived there.
Yeah, the
There was
Comanche
like
practically ran that territory. Yeah,
the Comanche and the the Comanche and Navajo, and the natives in California still outnumbered them quite significantly. And a lot of the main and the California was for the Spanish what was just purely an outpost designed for missionary work. There really wasn't anything else to it. There was just missionary work. And when the Mexicans got their independence, and when they realized, oh, California is still, that's now what we have to deal with. They weren't really sure what to deal with it because they weren't interested in the missionary stuff. They weren't interested in the monastic side of things. So they sort of just you then that's when you had like American settlers coming in at the same time as Texas, where they would allow English settlers to come in. Of course, under the Spanish rule, they didn't want Protestants to be and English to be move in. Mexicans didn't really care, and so hence why you had this sudden change, and you had the Bear Rebellion, for example, or Bear Revolt, whatever it's called, similar to that of the Texan Rebellion as well. Exactly the same. I mean, it wasn't as successful as the Texan one, and it's well known, but yeah.
Yeah, but one thing worth bearing in mind with Texas was like I think like the total white population of Texas was like 30,000 at the time they declared independence against Mexico. And these 30,000 American settlers won a war against like 7 million Mexicans. That's just a massive fat L for Mexico.
The history of the world. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add, and the thing is, we think of Mexico today as this kind of like, and it is like a semi-chaotic state with basically run by criminal gangs, corrupt military, corrupt government, barely functional. Back then, Mexico under the 1820s was a very, very powerful nation in the Americas. Probably even more, people thought were more powerful than the young American Republic. And so when you had the armies of Santa Anna at the Alamo, this was a very, very skilled European style army. This wasn't like a ragtag of chaotic Mexicans that you would think of. It's it wasn't just some
50-50
cobbled together.
AI. Honestly, military history terms, 50-50.
But you make a good point. It was a different.
But it was 50-50 in military terms. The Mexican army was based on French ideas, but was full of Mexican Indians who couldn't really carry those ideas into practice. So it was 50-50.
But it was a different setup than it is now.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I think the point is good. And Mexico it could be a pretty thriving country. I think drugs have just gotten into that system so heavily. I don't know.
Well, because, and let's be fair, Aubrey Ali, let's point out that the money that those drugs make mostly comes from America. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, they come over here and get people addicted. Yeah, I mean, no argument there.
Sure.
But yeah, drugs.
Guys, I'm aware that we're well over 2 hours, and we don't normally do these streams for more than 2 hours. So I would just say, Aubrey Ali, is there anything you want to plug?
No.
Like, aren't you doing a Twin Peaks channel at some
So yes, and it was going to launch on the 1st, but however, now I've got some creative ideas that I'm trying to implement. But it's just going to be along on the ride with me for that, and also Aaron Hook. So it's going to be pretty cool. So yeah, that'll be coming up in the
what's the channel going to be called?
So it is Twin Peaks Confidential, and if you Google that or go on YouTube and search for it, there is one little picture that I've got set up. So, and I did get the domain name for it.
So, and hopefully this time she'll actually start it when she says she will.
Anyway. That wasn't my fault. And I'm sorry, Aaron Hook, I'm throwing you under the bus, but he got hurt. And so we didn't do it that day. And
that's okay.
I got like this inspiration for a different.
That's fine. That's fine.
Do it.
Listen, I'll put a link to you. If you send me a link to that channel,
okay,
I will put it under in the description under this video.
And if anybody is interested in checking it out, go watch the old school Twin Peaks. Watch the first episode because we're going to discuss them episode by episode. But old school Twin Peaks.
What's I've never seen Twin Peaks. What's it about? Twin Peaks?
Yeah, you should check it out. But I say give it a couple episodes because the first episode they just introduce a ton of characters. But I'm sorry, Duke. I know you're like going crazy right now. But it's basically a murder mystery sort of. But it was kind of lauded for David Lynch bringing kind of cinema to nighttime primetime television, which was kind of a first at the time.
Right.
So,
okay.
But you can give it a couple episodes. But there's so many cool elements to it and rabbit holes to jump into and. It's and you like Mitch and you like Aaron and hopefully you like me, so I think we'll keep it interesting.
I'm sure it will be interesting, Aubrey Ali. AI, would you like to plug your channel, sir?
Plug my channel. Also, I like to give out a plug to which probably was not needed, but I watched it. Morgoth's latest video, latest upload.
Excellent. Yeah, I've seen
UK
that.
Meridian.
Yeah, really good AI. Yeah, do go and check out Morgoth's UK Meridian on YouTube. Morgoth's always worth listening to. I consider him a friend. He's a good man, and he's been on this channel several times. So go and check that out. And your channel is AI Shire Homelander, I believe, AI.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Mitch,
Shire
anything
Homelander.
you want to plug, mate?
I'm possibly floating the idea of like doing mirroring what Hitman's doing with his streams about Iran and doing my own version of that, but with Russia. But if I were to do that, that would have to happen, let's say, a week after the Crimean War stream, because at the moment, currently, I'm just reading about.
Yeah, give yourself enough time to start. Mitch is the only thing I would say to you, even if you take another week. But if you do that, I will certainly watch it. That would be most interesting. And for anyone who doesn't know in the chat, Mitch actually speaks Russian, so he's kind of good at this.
And like 8 other languages too.
Yeah. Mitch is a very clever guy for sure. But he does speak Russian, and so he has. I don't argue with Mitch about Russian history as I do, because he knows far more about it than I do. All right, guys. As always, I'm going to play us out the tune if it works. All right, that actually worked quite well. That was the British Grenadiers and March to the Sound of the Guns, which is the quick march of the Royal Artillery. And the British Royal Artillery, their motto is "Ubique," which means everywhere in Latin, because there ain't nowhere you fire war, there ain't no artillery.
I really love the music you've been playing to close out the shows, by the way.
Yeah, a friend of the channel, Patriotic Archive. He's on my Discord. He is a friend of the channel, and absolutely recommend Patriotic Archive to anybody who likes to listen to good naval and military music. But also, he's increasingly these days doing really good folk music as well. So yeah, go and check Patriotic Archive out. Thank you very, very much to my guests this evening, Reality, Mitch, and AI. Details to AI and Reality's channel will be under the stream in due course, although after I've been asleep because I've been awake all night, and it's now 8:51 a.m. And I haven't been asleep at all. So yeah, that will be up. And on Wednesday, please come and join us for our Crimean War stream, which I think will be interesting. It's a war that many people, people have heard of the Charge of the Light Brigade, and the thin red line, maybe. And probably that's about it. Whereas there was a lot more to it than that. And we'll tell you all about it come Wednesday. So go all, folks. And in the meantime, don't let the bastards grind you down.